Hello, I'm Matti, and this is Grief Liberation, Conversations in Community. Thank you so much for being here. Today's guest is my fiancée, AmberRose. Hello, AmberRose.
Hello.
What are your pronouns?
My pronouns are she, her.
And as you know, I use they, them pronouns. So, AmberRose, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, this is a question that is always tricky for me because I think I'm still figuring myself out. So that's part of me. I'm a person who's figuring out who they are, figuring out what values I would like to continue holding, what values I don't care to hold anymore. I am a new speech pathologist. I just graduated a couple years ago, but I just finished my clinical fellowship. So, identity and communication is something that's really important to me.
Thank you so much for sharing that. AmberRose is also my fiancée,
Oh,
newly,
yes, I am.
and I'm excited to have her on. So,
Yay.
thank you so much for being here. I think before we begin, we will continue with the trend of doing the physiological sigh. And for people who need a reminder, this is a technique I use to kind of settle into this space. We take a quick breath, then an extra sip of air, hold for about 4 counts, then slowly exhale for roughly 8 counts. Are you ready?
Mhm.
All right, let's go. All right. How do you feel?
Feel like I could use another one. Can we do one more?
Let's do another. Absolutely.
Perfect.
Here we go.
Mhm. Much better.
All right. Great. I'm glad to hear it. So, as we settle in, the first question that I ask everybody is, what is your definition of liberation?
Yeah. I feel like this is a question that I could have probably 20 different answers to. And I've sort of thought, well, we'll see what the answer is that comes to mind in the moment. At this moment, liberation to me is having the ability to be authentic and not needing permission or guidelines to what that authenticity might look like.
I think with authenticity and thinking about liberation, the way that we can feel mostly ourselves and feel seen and held and loved is to allow ourselves to be authentic
Mhm.
because other people aren't going to see what we're giving them if we're not giving them our authentic self. And therefore, we're not allowing other people to love our authentic self.
Yeah.
And so, liberating ourselves from the way that we see ourselves or how we hold each other by these rules of society, letting go of that is really big.
Mhm. I think authenticity is something that like I said, when I answered the tell me about yourself question, I am still very much in the middle of figuring out what is authentic for myself as I figure out how as I figure out who I am and how I relate to the world, I am a person I grew up in the 90s purity culture world. I grew up in a cult that ended when I was 15. And since that cult ended, purity culture at large, evangelical Christianity, they very much tell you who you are, who you should be, who you should not be, what you should eat, think, feel. So I am now 38, and it's been a very long journey of figuring out what is actually me or what is just something that's kind of been given to me.
I think that going through the experience that you went through could mean finding your authentic self that much more validating because I imagine in your experience and in my experience a little bit growing up as a Catholic in a conservative household that there weren't decisions for us to make. They were made for us. And so I didn't have to think about anything, but I also didn't know who I was because I wasn't allowed to think about that.
Mhm.
And as an adult, coming out as trans, coming out as non binary, leaning into my queerness has been all that more satisfying because that's mine and nobody could give that to me.
Mhm. I've always been really proud of myself for having moments of clarity when people were telling me like what to think. There were a few moments when I was going to a fairly famous church in New York City, and I I wasn't in a cult anymore. I was in a more what I learned was a more conservative branch of the Presbyterian church. I thought things were pretty liberal. Like they have women who are deaconesses, and there are other things that were far more progressive and had come a long way from what I grew up with. But I've learned now there was a long way to go. But I remember there was a women's conference, and it was supposed to be for single and married women, and it was about sex. And the wife of the famous pastor who started up the church, you weren't supposed to have sex before marriage, of course. And the wife that was running this conference was talking about masturbation, and she was saying, basically, don't do it. I don't remember if she had said, don't do it no matter who you are, if you were married or single. But basically, if you were single, definitely don't do it because that's just going to, lead you to temptation. And I was very proud of myself because we were in little small groups, and I did something that felt very, what's the word, abstinent to myself at the time, but I'm very proud of myself. I was the person in the group who was like, during our small group discussion, I was like, I really don't like that because it's my body, and I really don't like people telling me what I can and can't do with my body. I remember that the leader of that small group wasn't disagreeing with me. And I feel like I kind of put her in a difficult spot. Then went on to lead like other small groups in that same conference, but I'm glad I wasn't leading that one. So I'm really proud of those moments where I did have clarity about what I actually thought. And I still get kind of excited when I hear something. Sometimes it's so kind of outrageous and I'm like, no, I definitely don't like that. And then sometimes it's far more ambiguous. So it is a journey to figure out the more ambiguous parts for sure about what I think. And I'm trying to become more okay with not knowing the answers all the time.
Mhm.
Like right now, you and I are planning a wedding in a couple years and figuring out what I actually want instead of what I've just kind of assumed would take place. And also, like, some things that I have made decisions about that are kind of more because of my protection. Like, oh, I don't want this because it is more traditional, but then I actually do want it. So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm curious after hearing all of that, do you think that there was a moment that you were like, oh, I've come so far? Or was it more that, like, all these little moments taking for yourself and healing that you realized, oh, I have changed?
Definitely a series of small moments. Yeah. And there are some moments like the one that I mentioned that I have like brought up in therapy and I know that they're there. There are definitely probably a ton more moments that I haven't realized are moments yet. I think for me, when a belief that I've definitely been handed, trigger warning for Christianese, like homosexuality is a sin, that was a belief that was handed to me that I just sort of stood there holding, like, and that never sat right with me. And I think, yeah, the past, let's see, how old am I? 38. The past several years has been a gradual progression of a lot of little moments. Yeah. Of noticing, okay, this is definitely given to me. I don't like it. Can I get to the point where I come to terms with the fact that I don't have to accept what has been handed to me if it doesn't sit right with me?
I think as a whole, a lot of people are given information about our society and how it runs. And there are different sects within that, whether it's religious or, a cult or military or any kind of grouping of people where they have rules of how things are supposed to be. I think that everyone deals with propaganda and doesn't know it. And when you realize that the information that you were given and that you were raised to believe and didn't have any other evidence to support anything else, so you just take it on and carry it with you because what else can you know? And for some people, they're able to just carry on and keep those blinders up. And other people, like you and me, a lot of queer people, fight against that and fight what we were raised to believe and question things and get curious about things. And like, well, why is it important for me to believe this? Or why is it important for this group to believe this? Like, who is benefiting
Yeah.
from my complicitness, you know? I think that's a big conversation nowadays with where our country is headed,
Yeah.
but it goes back to these small things and how we were raised and how freely we accept everything as truth.
Mhm. Yeah. It, it's so much harder to think. And there is so much like comfort kind of ripped away because it's really comforting to just let go and let God, quote unquote. But like what you just said, who is benefiting from being told that, like, in the church I grew up in, I was told that we should always be rejoicing. And so the kind of like greeting was like, are you rejoicing? And then of course you were supposed to say yes. But who was actually benefiting from me feeling like I always had to be happy or rejoicing all the time? I wasn't benefiting and God wasn't benefiting. That's just a practice. what's the word? Thought cancellation, but it really gets you to not trust what's happening in your brain because you know that you're not rejoicing for whatever reason, but you're supposed to be. I was taught to sort of ritualistically give my thoughts over in prayer to God. So if I was feeling disgruntled for some reason, I would pray like, dear God, I'm feeling this way. Please take this away. And there would be kind of a little bit of a numbing that would happen after I would pray that. But that never led me to process any of that. And if something was wrong, you give it to God and you keep going and you don't stop and you don't question at all.
Do you get the sense that anybody who grew up in your cult and were required to rejoice all the time, do you get the sense that was something people could do authentically? Or was there just people who were so cut off from themselves that they leaned into it?
Mhm. I think it was possible to rejoice if you had benefit and that those benefits came from status. So if you followed all the rules, there would be a certain amount of rejoicing. If you were heavily involved with ministry and made it to all of the meetings, we didn't have church services, they were called meetings. If you did all the right things, you would be praised and you would hold a certain amount of status. And that's not like true rejoicing, but it does make you feel pretty good. Everyone was so disconnected from their bodies and their brains that they wouldn't know what actual rejoicing was.
So the cult that you were raised in, I assume, was a patriarchal one. Is that
Definitely. Yeah.
what were some of the differences between feminine and masculine roles?
Yeah. Women would only speak in the church if we would have our services were set up for an open time of prayer, and women and men would pray aloud. And then a person would, woman or a man, would then suggest a song and a hymn to sing. We would just sing it a cappella. And then there were men, no one had received a any education in biblical studies. They were just told that their role as men was to be prepared to quote unquote share the word that day. And we would actually wear head coverings. The women would wear head coverings once you were baptized. And that was to demonstrate submission to God, but also submission to men. Submission was a word that was common and it wasn't as bad of a word as you would think it might be. We were told that women were less than men, that women were there to support the leadership role that God has given the man. So were, we were all supposed to be servants. Women in particular were given quite a bit of emotional and labor having to do with volunteering their time. If a child cried, that child needed to be immediately carried out of the meeting. So I imagine it was really stressful to be a mother during those meetings because your child was supposed to be very quiet for a very long church service or meeting. They were supposed to be quiet and engaged, which makes no sense if you think about child development. So that was
Mm.
the woman's role. And yeah, men were supposed to be leaders and they were absolutely in charge. If you wanted to start a courtship, that's what that church did. That's kind of a whole other topic. But if you wanted to begin a courtship, you would need to get permission from one of the lead pastors. We call them leading brothers. So you would get permission and then you would go through a courtship. It was very much God is leading the man to then invite the woman in the relationship. And God leads both of you, but he leads the man in a particular way. And that ended when I was 15. As I got older, even as I was living in the city, the slightly more progressive version of that, which still, again, is not, in my opinion, progressive enough, is complementarianism. And that is the belief that men and women are equal, but have different roles. So talk about no nuance for, different genders. None of that. There's men and women, and they're equal, but they're different roles, period. Some of what that church in the city would do that was very frustrating for me was there was a lot of, in my opinion, pointless differences made between the treatment of men and women. So when men become deacons, and I'm forgetting the exact details, I believe that the pastor would put a hand on their shoulder, and that's supposed to be the anointing of the Holy Spirit on these men as deacons. When women become deaconesses, frustrating to me that they can't also be called deacons, but deaconesses, they aren't supposed to have that same hand upon them because they have a different role. They aren't, this particular church didn't agree in ordaining women. And so the men were ordained as deacons, but the women who would be doing the exact same thing were not ordained by this gesture because the church didn't believe in ordaining women. So that women would do everything that the men would do, but it was very clear that they weren't the same status. So that was quite annoying to me. Another moment where I was pretty proud of myself. I refused to become a member of the church. I worked in areas of the church, in almost every area, in music and children's ministry and the usher. I wasn't very heavily involved. And since I grew up in a cult, was very hesitant to pledge my allegiance to something, if you will. I didn't want to give someone the permission to quote unquote discipline me or to bring me in for a conversation if they felt that I was doing something that wasn't what they felt I should be doing along my walk with the Lord. And that was okay for the most part. A lot of people who went to the church knew about my past, and it was okay until it came time. I was the supervisor for ushers who would work the evening service. And there was a moment where the ushers would help with communion. So they would all stand on stage and they would take the bread basket and the small cups of grape juice, and they would all stand on stage to pray before they then went off the stage and started handing the bread and the quote unquote wine out. And the people who helped serve communion were all members of the church. And there was always a moment where we would be short on people to help with communion. And then they would look at me and I'm kind of like, well, I'm not a member. I find those moments of hypocrisy is the wrong word, but those moments of look at what you're doing and why you're doing it. And isn't it silly? And of course, if you say something like that to someone who does hold those beliefs, they would explain that it's not silly and that every commitment is a very spiritual thing to people who hold these beliefs. And I can respect that. But why is it a spiritual thing? When is the point where you become more flexible and let that go? And there was one opportunity where they needed me to wind up standing on the stage. So, yeah, status is very, I don't like it. And if it becomes clear to me that people are going for what looks best and I'm going to do this so that I can stand in front of a bunch of people and have them think that I'm awesome. I really don't like that when it comes to religion, at least. Performing on stage is something a bit different, although, yeah.
So that's a lot of information. Thank you for that. I can imagine how difficult things have been, considering all the obstacles you've had to overcome to be the person that you are now. And consciously, you're choosing
Mhm,
to be curious when you were raised not to be.
mhm,
And I'm curious how being raised to have certain beliefs that impacts you now as an adult. Do you feel grief around a life that you've missed or what you were supposed to do? What does that space look like now?
mhm. I think what I've dealt with mostly is I've always needed permission for things. And so I would get that permission from like my therapist or from my friends or my family. And it's been pretty uncomfortable to get to the point where I'm like, I can make my own decisions and I don't need permission. And that's still a struggle, working on that still. As far as grief goes, I almost grieve the kind of comfort that came with the sort of thought canceling moment. Or I grieve the certainty. Let's put it that way. I grieve the certainty that I always thought I had. And I do still have belief. I still believe that the teachings of Jesus are valuable and they aren't what people are carrying out largely today. And I have a belief in God. I don't know what that belief is, and I don't know what to call my beliefs. I feel at peace with that. A little bit more than I did. It's been a process for sure. But I grieve the certainty. I grieve having the guideline was really nice and working on figuring out my neurodivergence, neurospiciness, but I like rules. And then if if those aren't there, I'm kind of I don't know what to do. I do think about what I might have been like as a kid and as a teenager if I had a different environment. I was always very free to be myself with my family. I was I think, a fairly loud child. I kind of went around singing everywhere. And I get very upset when people called me quiet and shy. I wasn't quiet and shy when I was around my family, but I went to a school that was very strict and had a big shaming culture. After recess every day, we would have a moment called court. And in front of our peers and with the teachers, we would bring up instances where we got to essentially tattle on each other. So you would sit there while your peers are saying that you did something. And it would be decided then what your punishment would be. And usually punishments were called minutes, and they would be written on the board next to your name, how many minutes you would sit out at recess time, essentially. So I don't love being in trouble now or as a kid. And I definitely made sure that I flew under the radar for as much as I could. And I didn't get in trouble. And I was really quiet. And I did do what I was supposed to be doing. I work with kids now and I see them just happily stimming. And stimming was something I got to do at home, but I wouldn't have done it at school. I enjoyed my time on the swing. That's how I stimmed and how I soothed myself. So I do think about who I might have been. I'm happy that my current career helps kids say no. That makes me really happy because I couldn't say that to adults. I said it to my family, but I couldn't say that to other adults in my life. And I couldn't oppose the rules. As a teenager, I think some of it would be the same because I did get into theater when I was 14, and that like completely changed my life for the better. Wicked quote. I got to be expressive for characters' emotions and feelings. And I didn't really know what mine were, but it was a really good way for me to at least practice that expression through a character. I never did cuss my whole life. When I was 18 and I took my first acting class, my teacher gave me a monologue where the main character says the F word, and it was a big moral dilemma for me. So it was through these characters that I learned to cuss and I learned to yell and scream and cry and have big old emotions that were super messy. So I learned to be more messy. And then one thing that was actually helpful for me was singing at church because I had to be myself while I was singing, which was really scary. But I did it, and that was really actually a growing point for me. That was really helpful. So part of my teenage self would have still been a theater nerd, but I certainly wouldn't have been worrying about my purity ring and if I wanted to have my first kiss before my wedding day, because that was something that was a big thing in the broader evangelical culture, which like focus on the family, and their Brio magazine would have characters who waited until their wedding day to kiss. And growing up, I'm like, yeah, that sounds nice. And then I got into theater and I was like, well, stage kisses are a thing. So I guess I'm not going to do that anymore. But it led to a very stifled physical self. I tried it, meaning my just growing up in purity culture overall. You were, of course, supposed to keep yourself covered, but you were also supposed to move in a certain way that sort of made you quite stiff. If you were bending over, you wouldn't stick your butt out. You would just sort of go down, bend at your knees and sort of go straight down, then come straight up. So there was a whole way of physically existing in the world that was pretty darn rigid. And then I got into dance class and I had no idea how to wiggle that up. That was tricky. But yeah, I do wonder what my sense of style would have been when I was in the cult still. I remember, do you remember those like white collar shirts with the stripes that were really big? I think in the 2000s.
Yeah.
I got a long sleeved one that was a baby blue and brown stripes, and then it had a white collar. And the collar had like a V-neck situation, but it didn't go low. But I was worried. I was doing a teen camp at that point, and I asked the counselor that I was with, like, is this shirt too tight? Because we all went to TJ Maxx and went shopping. Is this shirt too tight? And she wasn't sure. So I bought the shirt and then I took it home and then I put it on, like, and got another opinion from another of the adult women where I was staying. And she was like, I don't think it's too tight, but it might be tight enough that someone might come up to you and say something. So then I went back to TJ Maxx and got another size that was like basically too big for me. So to avoid someone coming up and telling me that I was wearing a shirt that was too tight. So I always wanted to shop at Hot Topic more. My mom was always fascinated by Hot Topic, so we would go in there together and I would get some things. But I do wonder what my sense and style would have been like. And if I hadn't had to worry about that, I would have worn different bathing suits. It would have been nice to be able to do something with my teenage emotions. If I had a crush on someone, I just sort of had to deal with it because nothing was going to happen till I was an adult anyway. And I would keep crushes for like 8 years. So that's a little toxic because there's nothing you can do. And you come up with all sorts of things in your head that aren't true about you and the other person. And yeah.
Do you think your experience has changed how you look at relationships? Like being in relationship with me, for example, if you saw yourself now with me, what do you think that experience would be like for a younger you, and how does that feel now?
Oh, shit. My first thought is that my younger self would be like, wait, is she allowed to do that? Yeah. This is something you and I have talked about, but I was always told that I needed to like be in a relationship with a Christian and aggressively so a Christian. And of course, it needed to be with of course, in quotes, a cis, straight Christian man. And I think my teenage self will be really relieved. Certainly, myself from 10 years ago is really relieved because I checked in with her
Mhm.
because I always felt like I was standing on the outside of the queer community and I never liked that feeling. And I'm still coming to terms with what my own queerness means. But I think I would feel very relieved. I hope that I would feel proud of myself. That's something I'm trying to work on feeling now. Yeah. So my limited emotions as a kid and as a teenager and as 10 years ago, I think relief would definitely be a big one because I do get to be myself with you. And the neuro spiciness, the queer aspect, there isn't a patriarchal hierarchy at all. That's not a part of the equation, period. Yeah, I think I would like that.
Yeah, I often wonder for myself, what would younger me think of adult me? And I think one thing that comes up for me with that question is I'm definitely queer, definitely non-binary, definitely trans, but I think a younger version of myself would be shocked that I'm in a heterosexual presenting relationship because I didn't think how I felt inside would ever match the outside and how people perceived me. Is there a part of you on the inside that feels differently than the outside from when you were a kid to now, or
Yeah. I'm trying to think if my child self would be shocked. I don't know. Because what keeps coming up for me is the whole permission thing. And I would see my current self and be like, well, wait, who said I could do that? Is it okay if I do that? And my whole life, I've always gone to books to process my beliefs and process my feelings and process my thoughts. And I've always pretty much look to books for answers. So when I was young and I had started making queer friends and I'm like, wow, this is great. Wait, well, what am I supposed to think about things? So then I would get these books published by Focus on the Family and they had a whole group called Exodus International, that is no longer in existence, thank goodness. But that group published many books about how it was supposed to be loving your quote unquote homosexual neighbor. And, oh, well, this person is gay because of this has happened to them. So a lot of incorrect stuff. But I always have run to books or to people for approval. So I think my younger self would be like, well, wait, can I do that? Is that okay? Because I think for the first time, I'm making decisions for myself. And I'm listening to myself for what sin feels right to me as far as my identity and as far as my beliefs for other people. I don't have it all figured out. A lot of what I've just currently determined is I am me and I don't need to know the answers for everybody else. Sometimes I don't know the answers for me, but I also don't need to have all the answers, at least not immediately. My younger self would panic with that because I needed to have the answers immediately. For sure.
Yeah, I think that is a relatable experience, at least for me, especially the last little bit that you added on there, like having information. I have a lot of questions about life, and being okay with not having all the answers
Mhm.
is hard. I think that's very hard for a lot of people, and that's okay. I think the impulse is to reach for certainty because being comfortable with uncertainty just isn't on the table for
Yeah.
many people. And they want certainty so bad and they want to feel comfort so bad that they just latch on to what they can and what feels good and stop questioning from there.
Mhm.
But as far as being in relationship with you, even through the span of our relationship, I have seen a lot of growth from you and myself. And I'm honored that you would marry me. That's kind of an interesting thing. There's so much context that you come from and that I come from where deciding this is what we wanted and what we wanted together and what that looks like and forging ahead together
Yeah.
and having a relationship where we talk about the uncomfortable things, we talk about the happy things, we talk about all the things, but there is no hierarchy.
Yeah.
And that's always been important to me. I didn't want to be in relationship with someone that I couldn't talk to or who talked down to me.
Mhm.
And I'm just very grateful to have found you and to come to love you.
It has become a safer experience to rise in uncertainty because I have you and you've made it safer for that. But yeah, it's uncomfortable. It's been really great to like decide with you how do we knew that you weren't going to ask my parents permission necessarily, but we talked to them because that's our version of what we wanted to do as we like approached getting engaged, and we're doing what we want to do as we approach a wedding, and we get to decide what that's going to look like. And so that is kind of healing in its own way also. Yeah.
Yeah, I think with both of our backgrounds, marriage was supposed to look certain ways, like you said earlier. It was supposed to look a certain way. And I think for me, leaning into my queerness has been what has given me permission to look outside of the standard and what people are doing. And sure, there's elements of tradition that I'm going to lean into, but only after thinking about it and feeling like, is this a right thing for us?
Yeah.
How does this feel for me? How does this feel for you? And what is the reasoning behind it? But ultimately, it's our decision. And we don't have to entertain or care about the judgment of anyone to make or sway us into a certain decision, because the decision is to be together.
Mm-hmm.
And every other decision to me is going to be a lot easier after that, because we've decided to do the difficult things together, to
Yeah.
talk about the difficult things together, and to give each other permission and space to feel the things that don't feel great when they don't feel great, and still come back to each other. And I think that's what can make a relationship quote unquote successful, is
Mm-hmm.
the communication. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't hold expectations over your head, and there aren't roles that I assume you're going to take in relationship with me. I know that there's no such thing as a truly balanced relationship, but there is a balance that we can create that works for us.
Yeah.
And what we've created has been the best feeling for me that I've ever experienced while being in a romantic relationship.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just that I can rely on you and I can count on you for things, but I can show up as my authentic self.
Mm-hmm.
I can be my quirky weirdo self and let my neurodivergence
Yeah.
fly,
Yeah.
and we make each other laugh, especially because of neurodivergent.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think for me, just being in relationship with you has been one of the most healing relationships that I've had because of all of that. I didn't foresee a relationship where I could show up as my authentic self, or that I could show up and say what was actually on my mind without self editing
Yeah.
my feelings. I don't feel anxious when I bring up things that I would have felt anxious bringing up with anyone else, because I know that we're in this together and we are not a problem for each other. We are the solution together against the problem.
Yeah. That's really well said.
Thank you.
I agree with what you said about our relationship and where I know that you are in life. Like, this is the healthiest I have felt. I am still working on trauma responses and triggers. I feel very safe with you in having candor with conversations. And I agree with what you said about self editing. I don't have to do that. I don't have to worry that you're going to find something out about me and then be like, yeah, gross. Don't feel that way when I'm interacting with everyone in the world, but that makes sense because everyone isn't my partner. But I'm working on confidence for sure. And I'm working on giving myself permission, which is really scary because that means that I'm the adult and capable person, which is a feeling I don't often have, but I'm getting to practice it a bit more and more.
Thanks. So I really enjoyed our conversation, and I have two questions left. So, first one, what is bringing you joy lately?
One thing that brings a lot of joy is Jim, the cat. Jimmy is your cat, but like our cat.
Mm.
And I get a lot of joy when I say his name He is the subject of 90% of my vocal stim. And it
Uh-huh.
brings me a great deal of joy when he uses his little chicken squawk to talk to me, especially over the phone. That's bringing me a great deal of joy. And it has been for a while, but I get to look forward to that every day. He's a good young guy.
Well, thank you for that. He brings me a lot of joy too, and I'm glad that we share that. Last question. What do you want listeners to take away from our conversation today?
I think a reminder that if you can relate to anything that I've said, that you're not alone. I feel like it's fairly well known now, but maybe not everyone has heard this. How Brene Brown said that shame is best combated if it's looked at and discussed. And when other people can say, me too, I've experienced that. And so if you grew up in purity culture or grew up in any kind of system where you felt like you have to kind of fall in line and create yourself from a mold out, be a mold essentially, what you're supposed to be. You can relate to that at all. Just know that you're not alone. And there are other options as well.
Thank you. That was well said. Yeah. And I love the piece about Brene Brown. You're spot on. Basically, to combat shame is to speak on the things that we're feeling shame about. That is the best way to combat shame. And I know almost everyone experiences shame,
Yeah.
but being vulnerable and talking about the things that we feel shame about, that is what drives true connection. That's one of the reasons I do this podcast, is to drive people to connect, to talk about things that are real, and to stop hiding behind masks that society says that we need to hide behind, and just being our authentic selves. So
Yep.
thank you so much. I really appreciate you being here and sharing so much of yourself with everyone. And thank you, listeners, for joining in today. I hope that you come back next time. Please remember to like, subscribe, rate, and share this podcast. And until next time, please be kind to yourself.